Brevard State Representative Tyler Sirois and Port Canaveral have butted heads over his proposal that the port dedicate funds for the Indian River Lagoon. The port says it's doing enough for the lagoon. Sirois agrees, but says the port could help provide matching funds for state dollars. Welcome to Florida Today's I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. Today I'll interview Sirois. We'll talk about his proposal, why he opposes gun control, and the bills that he's filing ahead of next year's legislative session. He's also working on legislation to attract more space companies to Florida. You'll learn more about that. Tyler, welcome back on the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So I want to begin this conversation by talking about your latest proposal, which has caused some friction with the Port Commission, the Port Canaveral Commission. You're asking the port to pitch in to help the Indian River Lagoon. Originally, you were going to ask them through legislation to dedicate 2% of their revenues for the lagoon. Now you've sort of changed your proposal, but I want to begin, where are you right now, and what made you ask the port to help restore the lagoon?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me this morning, and thank you for the question. Sitting in the Capitol as a new legislator, as a member of Environment and Natural Resources Appropriations, and hearing all of the different water issues around the state. We have Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, the Caloosahatchee, the Springs, all of these projects going on, and all of them unique, and it kind of demonstrated to me that the Indian River Lagoon is not the only water problem in our state. We're competing with all of these other issues. Members from across the state are bringing a variety of projects to the legislature to seek funding for, particularly matching funds from the state. So sitting there, it realized to me it occurred to me the way that we're going to be the most successful is the more opportunities the legislature can find to provide matching funds to local entities. The cities in Brevard, the county commission have really stepped up. Senator Mayfield and I were able to achieve a $500,000 in matching funds for septic to sewer conversions. It's my view that Port Canaveral is missing from that discussion. They're a special district of government. They are not a private corporation. So I believe that there is a role for them to play in terms of bringing more aid and attention to the lagoon.
And what is it that you want right now? You started with 2% of their revenue, and now you're asking them to establish a trust fund for the lagoon.
I threw out an idea. The 2% over 30 years was one idea. It was one way of looking at it. There are some legislators, some folks who believe on election night something magical happens and you become all-knowing in all matters. That didn't happen to me. So what I like to do is throw out ideas. I like to initiate a discussion and see where that discussion takes us. After meeting with some of the port commissioners extensively over the past couple of weeks, that concept has kind of evolved into this notion of a trust fund where the port over a period of time would be making a financial commitment in the short term and the long term toward the restoration of the Indian River Lagoon. On Monday of this week, 15 babies were born in Brevard County. Think about what we could have for them in 30 years if we began saving and investing today in this type of trust fund and be able to support the lagoon well into the future.
How do the port commissioners feel right now about your proposal? Are they open to the idea of a trust fund or not?
Well, my understanding from their meeting yesterday, which Commissioner Hadaway had invited me to attend after communication from Chairman Lloyd. He indicated he wanted to talk further and focus on other projects and other options for us to explore. Commissioner Hadaway withdrew her request, her invitation for me to appear.
To speak, yeah.
And I spoke with her about that, and then they brought it up anyway. And my understanding is that they were not receptive to this concept of a trust fund. But we're going to continue talking about it. This is critical to the future of our county. I think 62% of our county's electorate said that it was worthy enough to of raising an additional half-penny sales tax to support. So I'm gonna continue the discussion with them. I would rather try, Isadora. I would rather try and fail than do nothing at all. And we're gonna keep pushing ideas and continuing the discussion.
So the port has the ability to levy taxes, but it hasn't for
33 years.
For 33 years, and they say that they are doing a lot for the lagoon already. What do you say about that?
I don't argue that the port is a good steward of the environment. They are. They have the sand bypass project. They test the quality of the water in the harbor. They sponsor a variety of events, and they are members of a number of associations that have an environmental focus. I don't dispute their environmental stewardship, and I don't dispute that the commissioners are good leaders. I don't think we'd be having this discussion today if our port wasn't an economic success. I happen to believe that there's more of a role for them to play in partnership with this community in a fashion that will improve the quality of the lagoon within the Port District.
So we recently actually ran a guest column by someone who opposes your proposal, and one of the arguments was that you have county governments and cities dumping sewage into the lagoon. You know, why not go after them instead of the port, which does the port even have an impact on the lagoon, but why not go after those entities instead of the port, which hasn't been the biggest, known as being the biggest culprit for the lagoon?
My view is that we need to have all of our options and all of our resources on the table. And the more partners that we can bring in to join this discussion and to help, I think we're going to get the problem solved that much sooner. The lagoon we've lived along this waterway, I think, since 1846, if I'm not mistaken. We're not going to solve it overnight. Restoration is not going to occur next week. It's going to take a long, sustained effort, and I think the port has a further contribution to make in that project.
So now that you and the port are, you have a difference of opinion.
Sure.
If the port is not on board with this, will you still go ahead and file legislation to make that happen? Because you can, as a lawmaker, the legislature created the Port Authority, and then you have the power as a legislature to amend this charter.
Well, it's something I've got to think about. It's something I got to think about, and but I value, at the same time, I value the perspective and the role of the port commissioners. I was meeting with one commissioner, and he said, "What's the darn hurry?" And the truth is, there is no hurry. There's certainly a sense of urgency that I feel as a member of the legislature with an opportunity to make an impact. And 2-year terms to make an impact. But I want to do it right, and I want buy-in and support from all of our stakeholders in the community. I think that's important. I'm not gonna move forward with a product that is not well thought out and planned and executed in a way that can be successful.
Yeah.
I can do legislation, but if our heart's not in it, that creates problems. But also, if we can achieve a solution without legislation, I think that's probably the best case scenario. So we'll have
the port itself goes ahead and does it.
Right. And I'm confident, I trust them. They're good people. Their heart's in the right place. They have a stewardship that they have to conduct. I have responsibilities that I have to meet, and we're going to find a place to meet in the middle.
Yeah. So the legislative session is starting really soon in January, and in September you will start having committee meetings. So things are moving quite fast.
Right.
Feels like you were in session just a few months ago.
It does.
Let's talk about some of the bills that you are planning to introduce that might have an impact here in Brevard.
Sure. Well, I'm excited about session just being around the corner. Committee week started mid-September, which is when we'll go back and actually start working on bills. Right now, I'm still in what is kind of a drafting phase where I'm doing research and putting together ideas. I receive concepts from residents across Brevard County and the state. I have my own ideas that I campaigned on and things that I learned standing on people's doorsteps. And just generally things that we need to do to move Florida's economy forward. I'm looking at a big piece of commercial aerospace legislation.
What is that going to look like?
Well, I'm still in the process of kind of planning that. I think that what I want to do is create an environment where Florida is the unquestioned destination for an aerospace company to come and set up shop and to build, construct their spacecraft here, launch it from here, and then reusability is a key component of that. We want people and these companies to be refurbishing their rockets and then launching them again from Florida. So I'm going to put together a package that I think will help us compete with states like Texas and Mississippi and South Carolina. Alabama is really aggressively pursuing these aerospace opportunities. So my bill is going to try to put Florida well out ahead of these other states.
Are we talking cash incentives, tax abatements? What would that entail?
Well, I for me, I'm sensitive to economic incentives because I want to make sure that we're positioning ourselves to be responsible with taxpayer dollars. But again, if I'm a company out in Colorado, and I'm building, materials that I'm going to launch into orbit and I'm going to build them with a 3D printer, I know that there are certain components of that industry and that activity that I can incentivize to bring here to the state.
Yeah.
The materials that are being used to build some of these next stage rockets, perhaps there's a way that we can exempt certain components of sales tax on those materials to make Florida a very competitive place to come and build your vehicle.
Yeah, and just a couple of years ago, there was a huge fight in the legislature over economic incentives. The former Governor Rick Scott wanted more incentives in the House. The Speaker of the House was staunchly against it. So, and I actually want to hear your thoughts about incentives because Florida has been all about attracting new companies, but we don't have the same cash incentives that Texas might have, for example. Is it time for us to boost incentives, and how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it depends. For me, it depends on the incentive. I don't like, and I'm not a supporter of the cash on the table.
Okay.
Kind of
meaning
kind
like
of offer. Here's $100 million. Go do
move here,
go do good things. I don't support that because I think that opens us up to the potential for abuse or a company that doesn't deliver on the promises that they've made. So when we do create these different types of incentives, I believe in clawback provisions. So if certain benchmarks are not being, predetermined benchmarks are not being met, then we're pulling the incentive off of the table. I think that, the beauty of a sales tax exemption on certain materials is we are defining very specifically what they are, and it's only being, the benefit is only coming when those materials are being purchased and consumed. So when you think about the construction of a rocket, a vehicle, we're talking about some very specific elements and not putting just cash on the table.
Yeah, and the governor, have you talked to the governor about this proposal? Because he has been paying a lot of attention to space.
He has. It is a huge priority for him. I'm very excited to be working with him and his staff. We're in discussions about what a commercial aerospace legislation should include. I think workforce is going to be a component of that as well. We need to create a greater nexus between our educators and our industry leaders, because these things, the way that these vehicles and crew capsules and materials are being developed, it's constantly evolving, and industry practices are constantly changing. So I want to make sure that our workforce and our educators have the tools to be flexible and to exercise agility and be able to meet the demands of this industry in a currently changing
environment. Are you talking about more vocational training, which was a bill that you filed in the previous legislative session?
Right. So really excited. A couple weeks ago, we cut the ribbon on a new vocational technical center at Cocoa High School.
Okay.
It's a beautiful facility. If you haven't been out there, the kids
I haven't been.
You have to go check it out. Kids are going to be learning about building a home and welding, electrical work, plumbing. They have a facility out there where they can do body work on cars.
Oh, wow.
So it really is a great opportunity for our students to be prepared to enter the workforce.
Yeah, and other bills that you're filing, before we started recording, you told me that you are going to refile a bill that died last session.
Yep.
To allow pharmacists to administer flu tests, which right now you have to go see a doctor.
Right.
And the reasoning behind that is that it's expensive to see a doctor. It's a lot easier to walk into a pharmacy to know if you have the flu or not, and then get the medication. Why did that bill die last time? You got a lot of pushback from doctors, I assume, right?
Yep, the Florida Medical Association did a pretty good job of killing it. I think it's great public policy, this concept that you're creating more accessibility in our healthcare system and reducing costs, particularly when it's related to an illness as severe as the flu. All of us generally recognize when you're experiencing flu-like symptoms, your pharmacy is likely a part of your daily routine, or at least you pass it on your trip home or during your commute. So what I want to do is allow your under Florida law, allow you to go into your pharmacist, receive the nasal swab test, and the pharmacist can confirm yes or no you have the flu, and then prescribe you Tamiflu, which is the kind of the general way that we approach that. All of that occurs under the supervision of a doctor. It's completely voluntary, so this isn't, Floridians won't be mandated to do this.
Yeah.
But it's one more option, because right now you can wait 2 weeks to see your primary. You can go to an urgent care where you're going to pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
You could go to an emergency room where you're going to pay a fortune, or perhaps worst of all, you could do nothing and just have it. So
And I think the most compelling argument against it was that just by going to a pharmacist, you might not know that you might have a complication from the flu,
Right.
such as pneumonia.
Right.
What do you say about that?
Well, the way the legislation is built is it provides the patient with an opportunity. The pharmacist has to inform the patient and give them the opportunity to report their visit and their flu test to a physician of their
Okay.
choice. So again, it's about patient responsibility, and it's about this notion of enhancing access to care. When I go into my pharmacist, it's my responsibility to make sure that I've documented to them and to my doctor that I was
Yeah.
there and was treated for the flu.
Yeah, it's a comic. Because like you said, going to the doctor is really expensive, and sometimes you just go there to get a medication, and
Right.
it's $100
Right.
for a visit.
Or you're there for an annual physical,
Yeah.
and you're not ill at all, but you're sitting next to someone who has the flu for 4 days and is highly contagious. So
That could happen. But now I want to talk about guns, which is
Sure.
a topic that everybody loves to talk about. The legislature, or at least the Senate, has said since the El Paso and the Dayton shootings that they're going to present some form of legislation to address mass shootings and gun violence. Any idea of what that might look like at this point? I know it's too early, but what are some of the things that you have heard?
well, I don't know what the Senate
Yeah.
Senate is planning. It's certainly their prerogative to look into this issue. I know that you and I have talked about it before, and your audience is probably familiar with my view on firearms legislation. You know, my big fear is that we place restrictions on law-abiding citizens. And in a free and open society such as ours, we have to balance security with our freedoms. And what I don't want to do is put law-abiding people at a disadvantage, and that's what we do. Criminals will dismiss the law. We can enact all kinds of firearms legislation. Criminals are going to ignore it. That's what criminals do. They break the law. They ignore the law. So what I want to do is make sure that we're focused on what I think is the root cause here, which is our mental health system. I support hardening our schools. I support the Guardian program. I support a citizenry that understands how to defend themselves. I think we have to start looking at these soft targets differently and understand that individuals who are experiencing some form of mental illness want to do harm to themselves and others.
Yeah.
So as a society, we have to start thinking that way. But what I'm not willing to do is restrict the freedom of people that follow the law and are doing what they need to do.
So you're talking about spending more on mental health? Florida ranks among the worst states in
Right.
the nation for mental health funding.
Right. We need to spend more in mental health, particularly with our young people. I think we need to give more tools to our school districts and our law enforcement to be able to recognize people who are experiencing mental illness and get them the help and attention that they need. Systemically, there are things that we need to do to make sure that our children are of sound mind and body. And what we saw in South Florida is an individual who fell through some of these cracks in the local school district and with local law enforcement. So what I want to make sure we do is we invest in a system that is efficient and focused on helping to recognize some of these mental health issues.
And there's a lot of gun bills that have been filed already.
Right.
One of them repeals Florida's red flag law, which allows a judge or law enforcement to ask a judge to confiscate someone's weapons if they're a threat to themselves or to society. There's also, I believe, one to allow guns on campus, on school, college campuses.
Right.
Would you ever support any of those bills?
Well, I support the college campus carry legislation, because again, I think what we have done is we've legislated these soft targets. We've created areas where we have said these people in this zone are vulnerable. And what I want to do again is not penalize law-abiding people who are responsible, who have that concealed weapons permit, who've demonstrated that they are aware of firearm safety and have demonstrated that proficiency. I don't want to leave them defenseless. I don't want to leave them open to attack and to harm. So the more we can do, I think, to create responsible citizens, identify mental health needs, and eliminate those kinds of soft targets from our society, the better.
Would you support repealing the red flag law?
You know, there's different versions of what that looks like, and I want to make sure that I read and fully understand all of them. But again, I think it goes back to this mental health discussion, and we're making sure that people are being served with their mental health needs, and that we're recognizing folks who are demonstrating troublesome behaviors.
And there might be a constitutional amendment proposal on the ballot to ban so-called assault weapons. Seems like you're not for it, but but I'll ask you, why should regular people have assault weapons? What is the purpose that you believe that they serve in society?
Well, you know, first of all, I would vote against that amendment if it's on the ballot, because what I believe, and I apologize if I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but what I don't want to do is limit or restrict the freedoms of people who every day they go about their business, they participate in our community, they're raising their families, they're running a business. What I don't want to do is create an environment where I'm limiting their freedom, restricting them, or putting them in danger. The nature of criminality is such that any ban that's implemented, any law that we pass tomorrow, criminals ignore it.
So why pass any laws?
They dismiss it because our society is based on the rule of law.
Yeah.
And generally, I would say 95% of our population, if not more, believes in the rule of law. They follow it and they respect our form of government. The rule of law creates harmony in society. So when you place restrictions in place, all you do is put law-abiding people at a disadvantage, because you're going to have this group over here that, regardless of what is done, they're going to continue to take advantage of this vulnerable population. So, you know, my concern about those kinds of bans is that they are an infringement on what I believe are our constitutional freedoms. Now, I know there's a lot of people that feel differently from me, but that ultimately, based on my principles and my values, my belief in our Constitution, that's where I'm coming from.
So before I move on, I have one more question about this topic. For
Sure.
example, the Dayton shooter had, I believe, 100 rounds and had, you know, high capacity magazines. Is there room to at least compromise on gun control for people who, from both sides of the aisle on this issue? For example, high capacity magazine, is there a reason why people should be able to have 100 rounds on them?
The one thing that I hope you've learned about me in our time that we've been having these discussions is that I'm always willing to talk about it, and I'm always listening to ideas. But what I would have liked to have seen in Dayton and some of these other places is that an individual is empowered to respond. We've heard before the saying, when seconds matter, the police are minutes away. And what I want to see in Florida and other places around our country is a citizenry that is prepared to take matters into their own hands and exercise that level of self-defense and preservation that I think is our constitutional right.
Yeah, difficult topic, guns, and I know the legislature is going to have a lot of fun talking about it. What other bills are you filing, or anything that's coming up next session for you?
Well, taking a look at more appropriations requests, I'd like to do more septic to sewer conversion projects here in Brevard County, and I've asked
And you got $500,000 last session.
Yep, we got $500,000 for septic to sewer for some of the most at-risk places along the Indian River Lagoon in terms of septic conditions in the water. Looking at some stormwater projects, various infrastructure improvements that are going to continue to help with conditions in the lagoon. Also want to focus on more dollars for our veterans, National Veterans Homeless Support. We were able to bring an appropriation home to help our veterans, and of course, near and dear to my heart, vocational and technical training, going to continue to work on as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if the legislature finally passes a bill to have a steady fund for the lagoon.
Right.
I think there's been a bill introduced every session to, I think, allocate $50 million for lagoon projects.
Right.
Why hasn't that bill become law?
Well, I think that we're competing with all these other water and
Sure.
environmental projects around the state, and I'm optimistic that our moment will come where we're able to make progress in a significant way on these dollars. But until we're able to do that, it's
Yeah.
incumbent upon us to be creative at the local level.
Is it like an awareness issue, maybe?
It is an awareness issue, and one of the things I've been talking about and planning is a Brevard Day, where all of our community members and stakeholders are in Tallahassee. We're all advocating for the lagoon and raising awareness about why it's important. But until we can do those things, we have to continue to be creative at the local level, and that's why I've engaged Port Canaveral in this discussion.
Yeah, it seems like in South Florida, because they have so many algae blooms and they have the red tide and they have the nasty blue-green algae, that they get so much attention. I feel like it's almost that we need to get a really bad algae bloom in order to get attention from the state. Because when things are good,
Right.
when there's no like major catastrophe, then the state doesn't really pay attention to what's happening here, right?
Right, and we need to do a better job of getting our regional partners on board. You know, in South Florida,
Yeah.
and I know you're very familiar with the setup, everybody's on board at all
Yeah.
levels of government. All of the counties are on board. We have 4 other counties besides Brevard that sits on the Indian River Lagoon, and we need to do a better job of getting them engaged in this discussion.
You think that we haven't been communicating well because maybe we have different issues depending on where you are on the lagoon?
I think that's true, you know, and we all have different geographic boundaries on the lagoon. Brevard happens
Yeah.
to include most of it.
Like 70%. Yeah.
Right. So that we have to get buy-in from these other partners, and I think that we can do that with some time and attention.
It is. It's difficult. Like you said, the Everglades get so much attention, obviously for very good reasons, and they're very organized down
Right.
there. But here, yeah, like you said, you have different communities with different issues. Septic tanks are a big issue here. They might not be as big
Right.
in South Florida, they care about Lake Okeechobee discharges, which have nothing to do with us up here. So it is a tough issue. But Tyler, we're running out of time. I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having
and
me.
answering my tough gun
Always a
questions.
pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks so much.
And I look forward to seeing you back here.
Thanks. It's an honor to serve. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's I Am Brevard for today. Go to floridatoday.com to rewatch the show and for local news. Thank you for watching.